Good evening, everyone. Hello. Hello to our Zoom audience as well. My name is Caroline Jean Fernald. I'm Executive Director of Harvard Museums of Science and Culture, a partnership of 4 public-serving museums where our mission is to connect collections and research at Harvard with global audiences, fostering community and deepening appreciation for science, the natural world, human cultures, and our shared experiences. With that mission in mind, I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's program, co-sponsored by the Harvard Museum of the Ancient Near East and the Harvard Museums of Science and Culture, and made possible, of course, thanks to the generous support of our members and donors. We are pleased to welcome Florence Dunn Friedman from Brown University's Department of Egyptology and Assyriology, who will dive into the stories told by the statues of King Menkaure's 4th Dynasty pyramid temples at Giza. HMSC's partnership of museums crosses many disciplines, and we host a wide array of events throughout the year at our 4 museums. Tomorrow evening, in this very room, the Peabody Museum and the Harvard University Native American Program will host a panel discussion on stickball, one of the oldest team sports in the world that has been played by Native American tribes for centuries. Join us on November 22nd for a science spotlight talk where Harvard graduate student Ruth Tweedy will explore why humans walk on 2 legs, even when our closest living relatives, monkeys and apes, still swing from trees. And on December 6th, we will celebrate Fossil Day with Harvard paleontologists sharing their favorite fossils from the paleontology collection. This will be held at the Harvard Museum of Natural History. To learn more about additional upcoming museum events for visitors of all ages, I invite you to visit our website, hmsc.harvard.edu, where you can sign up for our newsletter, or you can also follow us on social media at all the usual places. We are grateful to all our members and supporters for making these programs possible. I will now turn it over to Peter Demanuelian, Barbara Bell Professor of Egyptology and Director of the Harvard Museum of the Ancient Near East, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Wow, what a loaded program. You'll be here at Harvard day and night for the next month, I think. So, welcome to our 3rd and final Egyptology lecture of the semester, but I'm delighted to tell you we're already hard at work on the spring semester, so mark your calendars for February 25. That will be the next one, and more news on that to come. But tonight we're in for a special treat. Dr. Florence Friedman received her PhD in Classical and Oriental Studies at Brandeis University, where her dissertation was entitled On the Meaning of Ach, that's a religious concept, in Egyptian mortuary texts. She worked for 20 years at the Museum of Art, Rhode Island School of Design, where first as a guest lecturer and later curator of ancient art, she put on 2 federally funded traveling exhibitions and multi-author catalogs. One of them was called Beyond the Pharaohs, Egypt and the Copts in the 2nd to 7th centuries AD, and the other was Gifts of the Nile, Ancient Egyptian Faience. That one was particularly spectacular and has a sweet place in my heart. I remember the beautiful objects that she chose and installed in that show. She served as adjunct faculty in the Liberal Arts Division at RISD and as visiting scholar and adjunct professor in the Department of Egyptology and Ancient Western Asian Studies at Brown University. And she continues there today, it's renamed, as a visiting scholar in the Department of Egyptology and Assyriology. In an apparent detour, she was also an affiliate scholar at the Boston Psychoanalytic Society and Institute for 2 years. While Dr. Friedman's earlier research focused on the meaning and function of Djoser's step pyramid complex at Saqqara, she's turned in recent years to researching and publishing on the famous Menkaure sculptures at the MFA in Boston, the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and now the newly opened Grand Egyptian Museum. She's also joined several seasons of work with Ancient Egypt Research Associates, headed by Mark Lehner, where she's been working on the statue fragments found in Menkaure's Valley Temple at Giza. And I continue to hope that we'll be able to capture her next monograph in our very own Harvard Egyptological Studies publication series. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Florence Friedman.
Okay, thank you, Peter, very much for inviting me. And yes, the monograph will come. Tonight we'll be looking at statues of King Menkaure, who built the 3rd and smallest pyramid at Giza in the 4th dynasty around 2500 BC. The kings I'll be mentioning tonight from the 4th dynasty are Snefru, Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid, Khafre, who built the second pyramid next to him, Menkaure, and his successor, Shepseskaf. While Khufu and Khafre built larger pyramids than Menkaure's, Menkaure's complex yielded the greatest number of statues, though most are very damaged. Fragments were found in his upper pyramid temple and lower valley temple, both circled in red. The temples were barely begun in stone in his lifetime, but his successor Shepseskaf quickly finished them off in mud brick. Because there were no stone walls in his temples, there could be no carved wall reliefs. Having no relief sculpture may have been Menkaure's intention from the start. We don't know. But he did have statues. Statues were physical forms through which the dead could live. The word for sculptor, in fact, is he who causes to live. And to live, one needed food. So priests daily came before statues like this alabaster colossus of Menkaure, offering him food and non-food goods. If the figure is to receive the offerings, he or she must face forward. Frontality is a major feature of Egyptian statues. We're fairly sure where this statue, found in scattered fragments, once stood in the pyramid temple, but it was not found in situ. Only a few statues were. Like these four enthroned figures of Menkaure, now headless, found in the Valley Temple Offering Hall. Only one, number 19, was fully decorated before the king died and is at the MFA. The statue probably once included the head with the blue arrow, found lying beside it that Reisner the excavator rightly thought belonged to it. Its Nemes headcloth is dramatic, with pleating throughout, akin to the headcloth of the Sphinx, Reisner thought, making it a solar symbol. This pleated pattern is probably code for the rays of the sun emanating from the king's head as he appears like the sun atop his throne. The same solar flare was probably intended for its mate opposite the door to the sanctuary. The king died too soon to complete the statue program, so that only the sides of the number 19 throne got full inscription and decoration. What that includes are Menkaure's titles on the two front panels flanking his legs, followed by enthronement of his once seated figure, and the unification of Egypt on the back and the sides, the symbolic plants of north and south being pulled together by Nile figures, and on here as well, and pulled together through the hieroglyph for union, Sama. And up here, we have a sky sign, so that the king sat atop his united country and heaven and earth. In other words, all of the cosmos under him. The upper side panels also show, right here we've got the vulture goddess of the south, extending royal insignia to the king. The king is shown as the Horus falcon with upper Egyptian southern crown. And I think what we've got going here is something having to do with the crowning of the king. But on the other side, we have the cobra goddess of the north, who is also extending insignia to the king as the Horus falcon. But he here does not have the lower Egyptian crown of the north, which we would expect, especially since this is the north side of the throne. Now, I do find frequently that in this early period and earlier, that the red crown is not always represented. And my question is, could the white crown at times stand in for the whole of kingship? What is clear, however, is that we have on this statue the proclamation of royal titles, the enthronement, and the uniting of Upper Egypt, Upper and Lower Egypt, which are all coronation rites. Another coronation rite is the appearance of the king, which, though not present through inscription on the throne, is present in the king's dazzling sun-rayed headcloth that is code for the appearance of a new king as the young sun god. While we know the placement of the enthroned figures, the original placement of most of Menkaure's statues is unknown, as with these masterpieces stashed by the ancient Egyptians in a valley temple corridor, where the statues, purposely or by chance, escaped several campaigns of vandalism on the valley temple. In Greywacke, a rich gray-green stone, they show the king standing with one figure in the center, which we call a dyad, or with two figures in triads. These statues were not meant for the eyes of common folk like us. They were to be seen by the gods and the priests who could read their encoded messages. Today we enjoy them in museums, even if we don't grasp their coded meaning, but tonight we'll try to untangle a little of that coded meaning. First, size conveys importance. In statues of man and wife, the man is almost always larger than the woman, and thus the dominant figure. Standing men have left leg advanced. Women stand passively with legs together. Sitting outranks standing, with the standing wife often much smaller than her husband, who, if he were to stand up, would tower over her. Wives could even be tiny, grasping their husband's leg. But not in the dyad of King Menkaure and a woman, whom Reisner the excavator thought was Menkaure's wife. The woman is about the same size as the king. The statue is about 2/3 life size, found in the Valley Temple, not far from the offering room. The king stands at statue's right, which in Menkaure's statues is usually for the highest ranking figure. The woman is almost his height, which may be code for similar status. He has the advanced left leg of a male, even an active stride. But she also has an advanced left leg, though less so. Her stance, typically the prerogative of men, is usually, there are always exceptions, reserved for women of very high status, like a queen mother or a goddess. But a goddess would not have all this human hair showing under a wig. And we'll see that a goddess in company with Menkaure is always to his right. So we're confused. She may be a high-ranking woman, like a queen, but a queen wife or queen mother? We don't know who Menkaure's mother was for sure, but queen mothers in the Old Kingdom, Miroslav Barta notes, appeared to have, quote, played a significant role in the competition for the throne and the succession, unquote. Such political influence would be in keeping with this woman's high status features. The statue is unfinished, without pleating on the king's nemes headcloth or striations on the woman's wig. A separately added headdress could have identified her as the mother goddess Hathor, or even the vulture goddess Nekbet, as Borrega Gallardo recently suggested in a very fine article. But her human hair under the wig, very human anatomical details that I'll get to in a moment, tell me that she, and the position also to the left of the king, tell me she is not a goddess. This woman may be likened to a goddess, I think she is, but I don't think she is a deity herself. And since the base was never inscribed, because the king died before it could be finished, we may never know who she is, unless archaeology yields an inscription from another dyad, which I think, maybe I'm optimistic, but I think is still possible. Because Menkaure commissioned more than one dyad, shown by fragments I find at the MFA, that go to at least one more dyad, the same size as the Boston dyad. And I posit one smaller dyad based on a single fragment at the MFA. I think there were at least 3, maybe 4 dyads. His designers were creating statues in multiples, like his series of gray wacky triads in 2 formats, both found in the Valley Temple. Type 1 shows the king striding forth in the center between the goddess Hathor, who outranks him on the statue's right, and a lesser male or female deity at his left. Type 2, all the way on the right, shows Hathor enthroned at center, flanked by the king still to her left, and a lesser deity to her right. The triad format also turns up on tiny 2-dimensional seal impressions for Menkaure, where he stands between 2 gods who hold his hands, a motif translated by John Nolan based on Kaplony as ibis, introduce. We may be seeing here the introduction of the king, maybe into a type of shrine. I think I make a loose connection between this and introduction into a shrine at the Heb Sed. The Heb Sed is an important feature of this lecture, being the most important ancient Egyptian royal festival. Karl Martin described it as, quote, a festival in which the physical and magical power of the reigning king was renewed. The king is rejuvenated, and said it was so firmly institutionalized in royal dogma, at least in the early Old Kingdom, and that's where we are, that its celebration in the afterlife and its eternal repetition were obligatory. You gotta have Heb Seds into eternity. Beginning in the first dynasty, that renewal of physical power is alluded to in the king running between markers in an open arena to symbolically circuit and take possession of Egypt while holding a document case in one hand and flail behind. Seen more fully with Djoser in the third dynasty, grasping that document holder, later known as the mekis. Probably it was made of leather, as he runs in an open arena on the left between markers at his step pyramid complex. Did Menkaure ever use this classic running image from the Heb Sed for Menkaure? We now know he did. So there's still things that are being found. On newly discovered, unpublished seal impressions from ancient Egypt research associates, Menkaure runs the Heb Sed ritual race. And he's wearing, he's wearing here the lower Egyptian crown. He's wearing here the lower Egyptian crown. Here he's wearing the upper Egyptian crown. So you get more variety on the crowns in the ceilings than I think we're going to get in relief sculpture and certainly in the round. Thank you, Mark Lehner and Ali Witzel of ERA for these images. The Heb Sed was a theme important enough to Menkaure's sense of kingship that it was impressed on some of his official seals at Giza. But does the Sed theme appear in the triads? We'll look first at type 1 with the king in the center. When the king is at center, he's the most important figure, standing, moving, ahead of the other 2 figures. The mother goddess Hathor with sun disk and cow's horns is always to his right. But it's the king who is the primary focus because he's not only at the center, but he's the only one who looks fully forward at the cult action that would have taken place before him. Hathor, on the other hand, looks a bit to her right, and the other woman, to a lesser degree, looks to her left. Like all flanking figures in type 1 triads, making me ask if stage directions were encoded for the cult action for which the statues were made. Type 2 triads differ. the focus here is not the king, but the figure at center who embraces him, Hathor, his divine mother. And she sits, higher status than standing, as we saw. The king must be to her left, and that leaves the lesser deity off to the statue's right, usually a place for the dominant figure. But why would a king stand off to the statue's left side, taking second place to the goddess at center? Because he needs her. The statue is testament to his needing and advertising her divine approval, marked by her double embrace, which is code for legitimizing and presenting him, I think for presenting him as well. Presenting him for what? For what is in his hand. That document holder with flaring ends that Djoser held, the mekis. Hathor gives the king the right to celebrate eternal Heb Seds, evidenced through this mekis, which is in effect a legal document transferring possession of Egypt from the gods to the king in the religious sphere, just as in the secular sphere, legal documents could be transferred from person to person. Only a god can authorize Heb Seds for the king, because it's only the gods who outrank the king. Made clear in Djoser's third dynasty Heliopolis shrine that says, upper left, that the gods cause that the king celebrate Heb Seds, as well as on the right, ensuring that he receives all the things he loves. In other words, everything he wants, which, can I add, transcend food. For the earliest records of Egypt in the so-called royal annals often refer, and I'm quoting Wilkinson, to surveys of Egypt's resources, human, agricultural, and mineral, unquote. In other words, kings since the earliest dynasty are interested in exerting control over people, food, herds, gold, just for starters, and I would add stone and copper and textiles. All benefits are coming to Djoser as reward, isu, for what he does for them. It's a quid pro quo relationship. Menkaure honors Hathor by, for example, funding her temples, and she rewards him with Heb Seds, eternal Heb Seds. Now, he may need her, but he doesn't want to appear second best on a statue. Did he talk to his designers about this? I always have, imagine scenarios like this. We have no idea if he had any input in the design of his statuary at all. What we do know is that they, the designers with whomever, settled on extending his crown higher than her headdress, thus showcasing the king, even though he's smaller. If she stood up, she would dwarf him. And, this is very clever, Hathor turns her face very slightly to her right, leaving the front-facing king as the main subject of the statue. It's a win-win. She is seated at center and outranks him, but he looks forward as the main figure and recipient of the cult action, just as in type 1 triads. Type 1 triads have a theme that I think is related to the Heb Sed. Type 1 text says that all offerings which are in the south come to the king when you appear as king of Upper and Lower Egypt, which I'll call dual king. To appear is written, it's a word that's written with the hieroglyph for the sun rising above a mountain. When the king appears, he is the sun god. The ritual appearance of the king was not restricted to his coronation, but could take place at other times during a reign. Unlike, I think, the proclamation of titulary and I think the uniting of the Upper and Lower Egypt, I think those were reserved just for the coronation, if I recall. And appearance of the king could apparently take varied forms, which I think can link to the Heb Sed. suggested already in King Den's First Dynasty appearance in Heb Sed, recorded in the same year in the royal annals. Indeed, the two rituals are linked on this label, where King Den appears at top, not in words, but through coded image, as dual king enthroned on an elevated dais, appearances often needed an elevated place, and at right, he's shown as the king in the Sed run. The appearance and the Heb Sed intertwine very early. Niuserre in the 5th dynasty, his Heb Sed relates at Abu Gharaib. They also combine Sed festival scenes of the king running, the classic scene that we know from the Heb Sed, with scenes of the enthroned king. Enthronements that can be understood as appearances. The king's enthroned appearances here are episodes within the larger theme of the Heb Sed, which is what I think is going on with the triads. The appearances of the king in the type 1 triads are episodes within the larger theme of the Heb Sed. And just as the court where Djoser ran the Sed race was also a court of appearance according to Barry Kemp, I'm suggesting the open court in Menkaure's Valley Temple was both for the Sed and acting as a court of appearance for the king in this open court. In this open court, Menkaure could be, to quote Winfried Barta, revealed before all the world. With the type 1 triads, I think we're seeing a reenactment of a cultic play with such an open arena in which the flanking figures on the triads moved off to right and left to let the king move forward and appear as the new sun. Just like the king on the alabaster throne, who appeared as the new sun through his sun-rayed headcloth, where he too is a manifestation of the young sun. And in fact, the inscription tells us that the king is made in the likeness of the Necher Nefer, the perfect God, and that perfect God is the young sun, as the work of Berloff shows us. So, two statue types in different forms, in different media, one dynamic, with a striding king in a group, the other static, seated, which outranks standing, and solitary, one linked to Hathor on the left, the other to Re, each with different inscriptions, one with the Upper Egyptian crown and one with the Nemes headcloth. Yet both project similar messages about a solarized king appearing before the world. Different statue forms can project the same eternal truths, which is the point of state-sponsored Egyptian art. These type 1 appearance triads always say he is beloved of Hathor, the goddess who had a special connection to the Sed festival because of her role in regeneration, as Horning and Stahlen have noted. But we do not see the Heb Sed mentioned on type 1 triads. But since appearances of the king and the Heb Sed can present together, we should not be surprised to find it. And we do. In type 2, far right, where something new happens or doesn't happen. There is no appearance of the king in the inscription here. Instead, on type 2, the king stands and holds the mekis, which is code for Heb Sed, the object standing in for the written word. Two related, interconnected royal ceremonies are encoded in the triads. The appearance of the dual king, and by the way, it says in the inscription, he's dual king, king of Upper and Lower Egypt. He only wears the crown of Upper Egypt. Both are about eternal coronations and royal renewal, with the Heb Sed ensuring eternal youth and vigor. Since the king transforms in the Heb Sed into a young, vibrant king, it's not surprising that it's the Heb Sed that is given prominence in Egyptian art and archaeology above other festivals. The overarching theme of the whole body of Menkaure's gray-wacky material is, I think, the Heb Sed, with the appearances being a subsidiary episode in the overarching Sed theme of renewal. And renewal, of course, involved food. All the triads, 1 and 2, had provisioning texts. The offerings on type 1 appear in front of the gnome personifications on the statue's left, our right. Each gnome having its own emblem. The woman here personifies a gnome in upper southern Egypt, whose emblem is the face of the cow goddess Bat, with inturned horns. Hathor has outturned horns and Bat has inturned. Bat is a name that is grammatically feminine, making the personification on the gnome female. Each gnome has a number designation, like Upper Egyptian 7 for this gnome. 6 known triads preserve 4 gnome signs and 4 preserved inscriptions on the base in front of the female or male gnome from which those offerings come. So we've got 2 fragmentary triads here. We don't know their gnomes, and we don't have their inscriptions. Type 1 triads with female gnomes refer to provisioning Menkaure from the south with offerings that are init-i, in me. This is a tiny grammatical point I missed that Jim Allen showed me, which I think confirms who the speaker is. I had thought it was Hathor, the highest ranking figure on the triad, but it's the gnomes. Referring to nourishment in me, in the womb, is something male gnomes cannot claim. While all the gnomes give food, I suggest other goods for the king came under the rubric of all perfect things. And I think the ultimate source of all these offerings, whether given by female or male gnomes, is Hathor. So she still is the highest ranking person, and what I think is going on here is that as the highest ranking figure on the triad and the mother of the king mythologically and goddess of fertility, that provisions flow from her through the conduit of the gnomes being the middlemen. Why did Menkaure choose these gnomes to support what I think was his Heb Sed? The preserved gnomes can be mapped for Upper Egyptian 4, 7, 17 for type 1, and Upper Egyptian 15 for type 2. The given gnomes are in red, and I add my own hypothetical gnomes in green for triads that have lost their gnome signs or that I think existed based on fragments at the MFA. And there are quite a few fragments at the MFA. And this is my time to thank everyone at the MFA who's been so generous in giving me time over the last years to look at these fragments and to photograph them. We know that historically, goods from different gnomes supplied royal works. But the mechanics of how those goods in the 4th dynasty were documented as coming from different gnomes was only recently uncovered by the spectacular Red Sea papyri found by Pierre Tallet from the reign of Khufu, so before Menkaure. One Khufu papyrus lists 2 delta gnomes, harpoon and dolphin, up there in the delta if you can see. Numbers 7 and 16 in the delta. Those were lower Egyptian gnomes. Those were provisioning the king's crew who were stationed at Wadi el-Jarf on the Red Sea coast, from where they sailed to the Sinai to collect especially copper. One papyrus lists the towns in the dolphin and harpoon gnomes, giving the dates of delivery of goods at the top, the name of the person who probably dispatched the food, and more. It's an accounting ledger. The Egyptians were practical bureaucrats who documented what goods were coming from what gnomes. We have no papyri from Menkaure, one can hope. But we have his triads from which we know he was receiving goods from certain nomes. For I think his Heb Sed. What did he want from these nomes? Their resources. The nomes' estates and towns had food and all perfect things the king wanted. Like, let's see here, like textiles from Upper Egyptian 4 in the Theban nome from Gebelin, like alabaster from Upper Egyptian 15. There are major alabaster quarries here from Sheikh Said and Hatnub. From Upper Egyptian 17, we know that Menkaure allotted a small plot of land to a temple of Hathor there. And also, we know that Upper Egyptian 17 was providing labor, a major and important resource for Menkaure, without which the king's monuments could not be built. 9 huge blocks with 13 examples of red-inked graffiti from Menkaure's upper temple. Name one of the king's crews, and they came from the 17th Upper Egyptian nome, shown as a jackal on a standard, just as we see that same emblem on Menkaure's triad. So here it is here, and it turns up right there on the triad. And there's the resource of power suggested by the position here of Upper Egyptian 4. Upper Egyptian 4 over to 7 bracketed this area called the Kenna Bend, which was an area, Talay and Lehner note, that held one of the 2 most densely populated areas in Old Kingdom Egypt, rich with people, trade, and one might venture ideas and talent. It was also a nome that was well positioned to go out to all of the resources in the eastern and western desert, and especially right here, going out to Wadi Hammamat, which was the source of the stone for the triads and dyads I've been showing you. I think in green here, I put that in as a hypothetical triad because this is the Coptos here in Upper Egyptian 5. And that has the most direct route right here from Coptos out to Wadi Hammamat. I also suggest triads for Lower Egyptian 1 in the north with the Memphite capital, with its own concentration of people, ideas, and goods, a lot of which was coming in from the Mediterranean. And it had Tura limestone, very important. The limestone that was used for the upper casing on Menkaure's pyramid. And similarly, I can't imagine that there wasn't a triad for Upper Egyptian 1 at Aswan, because Aswan is famous for its quarries of Aswan granite, and that's the very material that was used for the lower casing on Menkaure's pyramid. I'm suggesting these gnomes provisioned Menkaure's Heb Sed, but do we ever see art before Menkaure that suggests that gnomes were provisioning the Heb Sed? Yeah, we do. Snefru from the early 4th dynasty, so before Menkaure, showed female personifications of his gnomes' estates, bringing offerings to him. And from reliefs on his walls and pillars and even an inscription, we know that the offerings are for the king at his Heb Sed, made clear by scenes of him running or standing with the Mekas, as here at the red arrow. And recently, Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner found at Khufu's upper temple at right further evidence for a Khufu's Heb Sed theme of decoration that we had already found bits and pieces of in Khufu's blocks buried in a Middle Kingdom pyramid. Hawass and Lehner found in Khufu's pyramid temple, so not in a Middle Kingdom context, but right there in the Khufu pyramid temple, a relief of an official from a Heb Sed festival procession. This fragment, number 1, is restored in a drawing, number 2, and flipped in number 3 to face left so that it can be fitted all the way in the right into a Heb Sed procession that's been dated to Snefru at the beginning of the 4th dynasty. What this suggests is that just as Snefru had a Heb Sed procession in his relief decoration, though we're not sure where, so Khufu had a Heb Sed procession in his relief decoration in his pyramid temple. We had already suspected the Heb Sed theme for Khufu from other reliefs found in that Middle Kingdom context. For example, this one showing Khufu in a Heb Sed cloak. Wish that we had that for Menkaure. Or this female personification of one of Khufu's gnomes' estates, left, who was bringing food, I suggest, possibly for Khufu's Heb Sed, just as Snefru's personified gnomes' estates on the right brought food for him for his Heb Sed. The Heb Sed seems more and more to have been a focus of Khufu's temple decoration, including possibly these reliefs of offerings, and Khufu's name is right up here. So we know they were for Khufu, but found in that Middle Kingdom context. They may be gnomes' estate names, top, and goats, where estate names may be lost due to damage, noted Dorothea Arnold. I suggest these offerings may be for the Heb Sed that we know now was a focus for Khufu. The Egyptians are recording information on offerings and their geographical sources that is spread out in Snefru and Khufu two-dimensional wall reliefs, and which I think was condensed by Menkaure into 3D triads that act in part as abbreviated ledger accounts of goods delivered from gnomes and their estates. The works of art spring in part from the same economic need that created the Wadi el-Jarf accounting ledgers, the mundane task of recording goods and where they came from. As Hathor on the triads is the ultimate source of the goods for the king through the conduit, I think, of the gnomes, so the king is in principle the source of the goods for his crew through the conduit of dispatchers. The gnome personifications on the triads and the dispatchers in the papyrus are the middlemen. Was the dyad also of Greywacke and large compared to the triads, related to the Heb Sed theme? Interestingly, the woman's double embrace on the dyad mirrors Hathor's on the Heb Sed Boston triad. I think that the Greywacke triads and dyads were designed as a group that all related to aspects of the Heb Sed theme. It would help to know who she is. The king turns his face to his right, and she tilts her head ever so slightly to her left. But she does not rotate her face the way he does. She looks forward, making her the main subject of the statue, not the king, as Dorothea Arnold also noted. And that's pretty incredible, that the king is letting himself be upstaged here. She's got to be incredibly important. She shares facial features with Hathor on the triads, but especially with the youthful Hathor on the Heb Sed type 2 triad on far right. The woman in the dyad is likened to, assimilated to Hathor, with a youthful face, but her body sends other subtle signals. Dorothea Arnold, again, very observant, noted the dyad, the woman has the dropped nipples of a mother. Her breasts sag slightly, which is only noticed. You don't notice it when you just look at the dyad. You have to compare it with the more youthful features, the breast features, of women in the triads, as on the right. I note the dyad woman's slightly sagging tummy on left, recalling the looser abdominal flesh of a woman who has borne children. Again, only noticed when contrasted with the more oval, taut abdomen on a female in the Heb Sed triad right. The breasts and tummy on the dyad's woman may be code for, I think they are code for, mother. Just as the earlier 4th Dynasty mother, Heb Sed II, on our left, has slightly dropped nipple and thicker waist, wider hips and thighs, only noticed when compared to those of her young daughter, Queen Merisonk III. Tiny coded details, and there are more, tell the viewer that Heb Sed II is the mother. Despite their emphasis on youth, artists could show age. And different stages of life appear in Menkaure's faces, as in this head from Brussels that I and others think go to the MFA's magnificent fragmentary triad. The sagging skin and lines on this Brussels piece say older, whether the king looked like this or not. His faces running from old on the left with the Brussels head to mature through type 1s to very young far right in the Heb Sed triad. I suspect the triads ran in some order like this that focused on rejuvenation. Thus, ending with the Heb Sed triad in whatever sequence that was in the cultic ritual. But whether the male face is haggard left or youthful right, the male body remains young. The coupling of old and young features, or mature face and young body, seems intentional, so that coding for both youth and maturity, divine and human qualities in the dyad's woman, probably the queen mother, may not be unexpected. Did the dyad and its lost mates have a special role in the rejuvenation of the king at the Heb Sed? Now we'll look at the dyad a bit. The dyad was found in a valley temple hole, deeper than the find spot for the king's triads. So we're here in the, and we're looking east over here. So the triads, there were 4 of them found here. One fragment of the type 2 was found deep in the hole with the dyad. Another type 1 fragment of a triad was found out in the court. On the left, I was so glad I got this photograph. Dan Jones, I asked him to point up to where the triads had been and point down to where the dyad was in the hole, which I think is very illustrative and very hard to imagine, I think, from some of the excavation reports. So up there were the triads, and down here was the dyad. Where Reisner found the dyad leaning against the wall of this hole, facing east toward Wally Gilbert, Mark Lehner, and Dan Jones. The hole is deep. It got to be even deeper than this. This wasn't as deep as they ultimately went. In its hole, the dyad faced east with the Kent Cowes town here, so that to the queen to her left is this Kent Cowes town. And I think she is slightly, ever so slightly tilting in that direction. Whereas the king here is looking off to his right. Was he looking off to the right front? Can we make such a speculation? What we've got going on here is Hayt el Garab. The settlement where Lehner thinks there may have been a palace or some kind of palace layout for Menkaure. Was Menkaure turning toward his palace and the woman tilting toward her town? Was she somehow identifying with, even through being on the same side of, was she somehow identifying with the Khentkaus monument to her left? Khentkaus' huge tomb, and it's only when you're in Giza standing there that you realize how mammoth it is. Some people have called it, I think Hassan called it the fourth pyramid. It has many royal features, usually reserved for a king. An inscription says she was a queen mother, but it doesn't say who her royal son or sons were. Some read the inscription as suggesting that she was a king herself, as well as a mother of a king. Is Khentkaus the lady in the dyad? Mark Lehner thinks she is. Lehner's archaeological argument for the identity of Khentkaus as the mother of the king and the woman in the dyad notes that her town almost touches his valley temple, with a path linking the two. The intimacy between the two monuments, suggesting a close relationship of some kind, including shared family and mortuary cult. Lehner suggests that Khentkaus was perhaps even venerated within Menkaure's valley temple. What is clear is that this statue, with Queen Mother, I think, was treated with extraordinary care by the ancients. Though Reisner thought that Vandals had thrown it into the hole to get it out of the way while searching for treasure, at almost 1,500 pounds and in virtually pristine condition, this is a statue that was not thrown by anybody into a hole. Even the beard, a statue part famously lost or damaged, had only a tiny break at the time of discovery. When it was pulled by Reisner's team up from this muddy hole where it was deposited, presumably to preserve it from the vandalism that befell the other dyads and statues. But the base is a different story. There's lots of damage, which I only saw a few years ago when the statue was being moved for an exhibition. It was going to be crated, and the skirt that hid the base was taken off, and I could see all this damage. These are not code, but clues, with evidence of tilting, rocking, and banging of the base, probably during some kind of transport over maybe a century, as suggested in discussion with two former MFA conservators, Jean-Louis Lechèvre and Mimi Levesque. But where, we ask, was the statue taken and why? The dyad with Menkaure and his mother could have been used ceremonially at both Menkaure's Valley Temple and Khentkaus' complex. Indeed, 5th and 6th Dynasty royal inscriptions talk about moving queen's statues and queen mother's statues for ceremonial rites. In other words, ritual transport of them various places. The dyad could have been moved about for similar reasons, dragging it on a sledge from the Valley Temple to Khentkaus. We have tomb images for moving such a standing statue in a doored shrine on a sledge. Or the dyad could have been put in a closed shrine on a boat and towed along the waterway's banks, fronting the Menkaure Valley Temple and Khentkaus' complex. This is the sort of ritual transport I'm positing for the dyad if it were moved between the two places, where the pivoting, wedging, rolling, gripping, and handling could have caused the damage to the base we see today. There is still so much to understand about this statue, and archaeology at the Menkaure Valley Temple may yet yield more data. What we can conclude is that this was a prized statue, well preserved and ritually used, and a statue that gives visible prominence to the Queen Mother, whoever she was. And I think we can conclude that she was someone that the king ritually needed. Identified with Hathor, she is the mortal version of his divine mother. Hathor embracing, legitimizing, and presenting her son. The ritual in which she embraced and presented him must relate to the themes we saw in the Grey-Wacky triads, the Heb Sed and its appearances and provisioning that were part of the Heb Sed. Menkaure's divine and human mothers could provide him with eternal regeneration, the major theme of the festival. The identity of the woman and how she fits into the Menkaure statue themes of eternal rule and regeneration are part of my ongoing research and for a future lecture. Thank you.